Welcome to Learning English, a daily 30-minute program from the Voice of America. I'm Ashley Thompson. This program is aimed at English learners. So we speak a little slower, and we use words and phrases especially written for people learning English. Today on the program, you will hear stories from Jonathan Evans and Brian Lynn. Kelly Jean Kelly brings us the next episode of America's Presidents. But first, more than 100 women were elected to United States legislative office in midterm elections Tuesday. A record number will serve in the new Congress. The results came almost 2 years after women marched in Washington and cities across the country to oppose the inauguration of President Donald Trump. The Associated Press reported that a record 237 women ran for the House of Representatives this year. As of Wednesday, at least 100 won their House races, easily beating the old record of 84. The number of female winners is expected to grow, as results had not been called for more than 10 races with women candidates. Most of the women who won were Democrats, who helped the party capture a majority in the House. Christopher Borick is director of the Muhlenberg College Institute of Public Opinion. He says the role women played in this election lived up to expectations. Borick said, "We are seeing a vast increase in the percentage of women that will be within the House of Representatives. I'll give you an example in Pennsylvania, which is kind of one of the most striking scenes. Before this election, we had zero, not one member of an 18-seat congressional delegation that was a woman. Tonight, just in suburban Philadelphia, in the Lehigh Valley where I'm speaking from, 4 women won in a really tight area." Ilhan Omar of Minnesota and Rashida Tlaib from Michigan became the first 2 Muslim women to win election to Congress. Other winners Tuesday included Sharice Davids from Kansas, one of the first 2 Native American women elected to Congress, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York, the youngest woman ever elected to Congress. Texas is set to send its first Hispanic women to Congress, as Democrats Veronica Escobar and Sylvia Garcia both won their races. Ayanna Pressley became the first Black woman elected to Congress from Massachusetts. She talked about the historic nature of the election. Pressley said, "Now listen, I know for a fact none of us ran to make history, we ran to make change. However, the historical significance of this evening is not lost on me." There was also an historic gender gap that showed women more supportive of Democrats than Republicans. VoteCast reported that more women voted for Democratic candidates than men. About 6 in 10 voted for the Democrat in the race, compared with 4 in 10 for the Republican candidate. Men were more evenly divided in their vote. Women also reached a record number in the United States Senate. The Associated Press reported 24 women were set to serve in the Senate starting in January, 1 more than before. The decisive record breaker came from the Republican Party. U.S. Representative Marsha Blackburn defeated the state's former governor, Democrat Phil Bredesen. Blackburn will become the first woman to represent Tennessee in the Senate. Blackburn said in her victory speech, "Now you don't have to worry if you are going to call me Congressman or Congresswoman or Congresslady. Now, Senator will do." Several women Democrats captured governorships currently held by Republicans, including Laura Kelly in Kansas and Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan.
Scientists have recreated a 1985 study of birds in Peru that shows climate change is pushing them from their natural environment. 30 years ago, researchers studied more than 400 kinds of birds living on a mountainside in Peru. In 2017, researchers looked again at the bird populations. They found that almost all had moved to higher places in the mountain. Almost all had decreased in size. And the scientists say at least 8 bird groups that started at the higher elevations had died out completely. John W. Fitzpatrick is director of the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology and a co-writer of the study. He said, "Once you move up as far as you can go, there's nowhere else left." The researchers say the birds might have moved up the mountain because of temperature changes. Or they say changes to food sources may have forced them to go higher. The findings were published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Past research has documented birds and other animals moving up in elevation in reaction to warming temperatures. Mark Urban is director of the Center of Biological Risk at the University of Connecticut. He said, "This recent study was the first to prove that rising temperatures and moving to avoid them can lead to extinction." In 1985, Fitzpatrick and a team of scientists established a camp alongside a river running down a mountainside in southeastern Peru. He wanted to document where tropical bird groups there lived. His team spent several weeks using nets to catch and release birds. They kept detailed notes of birds they caught, saw, or heard. In 2016, Fitzpatrick passed his notes, photos, and other records to Benjamin Freeman. He is with the Biodiversity Research Center at the University of British Columbia. Freeman has been researching tropical birds for more than 10 years. He set out in August and September of 2017 to copy Fitzpatrick's study. His team used the same methods, searching the same places in the same time of year. Freeman's team wanted to see how things had changed for the bird groups since 1985. The average temperatures on the mountain had risen 0.42 degrees Celsius. Freeman's team placed 20 sound recording devices on the mountain to record the sounds of birds that might not easily be seen. Freeman said that the birds moved an average of 98 meters further up the mountain. He said he believes that temperature is the main cause of the birds' movement. Fitzpatrick noted that birds used to living in areas with little temperature change may be especially at risk because of climate change. He said, "We should expect that what's happening on this mountaintop is happening more generally in the Andes and other tropical mountain ranges." I'm Jonathan Evans.
China is developing a system that recognizes individuals by their body shape and walking movements. Systems that recognize human faces are already being used to identify people in crowds or as a secure way to unlock personal devices. The new system, known as gait recognition, is already being used by police on the streets of Beijing and Shanghai. The Chinese technology company Watrix developed the system. The company announced last month that it had raised $14.5 million to speed up the development and sale of the technology. The system works in a similar way to face recognition. Cameras capture video of people in public places. Then, machines powered by artificial intelligence, or AI, examine and study the video. Facial recognition systems identify the shapes and expressions on a person's face to identify them. Gait recognition uses a person's body shape and their way of walking to identify them. The system records a person's shape and movements and then creates a model of the way they walk. Huang Yongjian is a former researcher who co-founded Watrix in 2016. He told the Associated Press his system can identify people from up to 50 meters away. It is designed to work even when a person's face is covered or hidden. Successful facial recognition usually requires clear, close-up images of a person's face. Currently, the Watrix system is not able to identify people in real time. Users have to enter video into the system, which then takes about 10 minutes to process each hour of video. Huang says his gait recognition system is correct 94% of the time. This is below the success rate of many face recognition systems. But he says the system can still be helpful to police and for other commercial purposes. He also believes the system can be effective when used together with face recognition. You don't need people's cooperation for us to be able to recognize their identity, Huang told the AP. People still don't recognize they can be recognized by their gait, whereas everybody knows you can be recognized by your face, he added. He said the system would not easily be misled by a person changing their usual way of walking or other body movements. This is because the AI system is designed to examine all movements over the entire body. We believe you are totally unique in the way you walk, Huang said. Gait recognition is not new. The technology has been researched by scientists in Japan and Britain and by U.S. defense officials for about 10 years. But attempts to sell the technology have been slow. One of the reasons the technology has not developed further is because the systems are more complex than facial recognition. Mark Nixon is a leading expert on gait recognition at Britain's University of Southampton. He told the AP the technology requires bigger computers because you need a sequence of images rather than a single image, he said. Security officials in China's far western province of Xinjiang have reportedly expressed interest in the system. Muslim ethnic minorities in the province are already subject to intense government surveillance and control. Shi Shu Shi is a Chinese writer and commentator. He told the AP he is not surprised that the technology would launch in China before the rest of the world. He said this is because of the Chinese government's use of social control methods. Using biometric recognition to maintain social stability and manage society is an unstoppable trend, Xu said. He added, "It's great business." I'm Brian Lynn.
VOA Learning English presents America's Presidents. Today we are talking about George Herbert Walker Bush. Before he became president in 1989, Bush had a lot of experience in government. He spent 4 years in the United States House of Representatives, worked as the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, and led the Central Intelligence Agency, or CIA. Then, for 8 years, he was vice president under Ronald Reagan. Interestingly, in U.S. history, a person serving as vice president rarely becomes president after the sitting president leaves office at the end of his term. Before George H.W. Bush, the last time such an event happened was in 1836. At that time, Martin Van Buren took office after the 2-term presidency of Andrew Jackson. Yet, neither Bush nor Van Buren was able to deal successfully with some of the problems facing the country during their years in office, or to persuade voters to elect them for a second term. While many people respect Bush for his foreign policy successes, his years in office are also remembered as a time of economic problems and social unrest. George Bush was born into a wealthy family in Massachusetts and raised in a Connecticut town near New York City. He had 3 brothers and a sister. Their father was a business leader who became a U.S. Senator. Their mother was active doing public service work. The family employed servants, but Mrs. Bush did not want her children's privileged position to make them think they were special. Instead, she taught them to work hard and help others. When he was a young man, George Bush moved away from home to attend a private high school in Massachusetts. There, he played baseball and soccer and was elected student body president. On his 18th birthday, Bush joined the U.S. Navy. For 3 years, he fought in World War II. At the time, he was the youngest pilot in the Navy and earned a medal for bravery. In early 1945, he married a young woman he had met at a dance. Her name was Barbara Pierce. After the war, she and George moved to Connecticut, where he studied economics at Yale University and played on the school's baseball team. In time, they moved to the southern state of Texas. George Bush worked in the oil industry and became president of a company that sold oil drilling equipment. George and Barbara Bush mostly raised their 4 sons and 1 daughter in the Houston, Texas area. Another daughter died of cancer when she was a child. In time, George Bush decided to follow his father's example and enter politics. He became a Republican Party official. Then he was elected to the U.S. Congress, representing part of Houston. Despite having a home in Texas, opponents and the public connected Bush with the East Coast and the upper class. That image created some problems for Bush in the presidential election of 1980. By then, he had held other high offices in the federal government and had been successful as the head of the CIA. But voters liked another Republican candidate, former California Governor Ronald Reagan. Many Americans remembered Reagan from his days in movies and on television. When Reagan was nominated as the party's candidate for president, he asked Bush to be vice president. For 8 years, Bush held the office and worked closely with Reagan on foreign policy and other issues. In 1988, Bush finally won the presidency in his own right. On entering the White House, the new president promised to continue many of Reagan's policies of limited government. While he was a candidate, Bush often said that, if elected, he would not raise taxes. Bush also said that he wanted the United States to be a kinder and gentler nation. He wanted especially to support community organizations in their efforts to reduce crime, homelessness, and drug abuse. He also signed legislation to help people with disabilities and to protect the environment. But Bush faced a number of problems. One was a large budget deficit, created in part by increased military spending during the Reagan years. Another were disputes in Congress with the Democratic Party. And another was a banking crisis. After years of problems in the savings and loan industry, more than 1,000 small financial institutions failed. In time, Congress agreed to spend billions of dollars to help the industry recover. And President Bush had to break his promise not to raise taxes. He pointed out that he needed to balance the budget. However, many Americans and some members of his own party felt betrayed. The economic troubles helped create a mood of unrest in the country. The feeling was strengthened by events around the world. Soon after Bush took office, the Chinese government launched a campaign to stop protests in Beijing's Tiananmen Square. A few months later, the Berlin Wall came down. The wall separated East and West Germany. Many considered its collapse to be the end of the Soviet Union's control of Eastern Europe. At the same time, the leader of Panama, Manuel Noriega, was threatening Americans. He was also accused of supporting drug traffickers and the drug trade in the United States. Bush answered all the events in a calm, cautious way. He tried to keep good relations with China and the Soviet Union. In time, he ordered military action in Panama, and U.S. troops ousted Noriega. Supporters praised Bush's cool head and way of doing things. But critics questioned Bush's decisions. Some said he went too far. Others said he did not go far enough. The same criticisms and support were repeated during the Gulf War against Iraq. In brief, Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein ordered his forces to invade and occupy Kuwait. Bush and other world leaders created an international coalition to seek a diplomatic solution. When diplomacy failed, U.S. troops led international airstrikes against Iraq. Coalition forces also attacked on the ground. In a few weeks, the Iraqi leadership agreed to a ceasefire. Some criticized Bush for letting Saddam Hussein stay in power, but the American public largely approved of Bush's actions. He won praise for helping create an international coalition to answer the Iraqi occupation. The effort showed what some called a new world order. The U.S. and Soviet Union had even worked successfully together. Yet, soon after the end of the Gulf War, Bush failed in his efforts at re-election. The U.S. economy had entered a recession, and Bush was not able to connect effectively with voters, even though those who knew him personally said Bush was a kind, gentle person. One of his last acts as president was to write a note for the candidate who had beat him, wishing him well. George H.W. Bush retired to his home in Texas with his wife, Barbara. They also have a house in Maine. Bush often urged Americans to help others in their community. He put his words into action by volunteering with his church and supporting a local hospital. On his 90th birthday, Bush did something unusual to test his image as a cautious person. He celebrated by going skydiving. For many, Bush is remembered for his connection to other presidents. He is often linked to the Reagan years. Compared to Reagan, Bush is usually considered a less conservative leader, as well as a less charismatic one. By the 21st century, historians began comparing the former President Bush with another president, his son, George Walker Bush, who took office 8 years after his father left it. I'm Kelly Jean Kelly.
And that's our program for today. Listen again tomorrow for more stories and information from around the world. Thanks for listening. I'm Ashley Thompson.